We're going to do a quick snippet here of Jeanette Bachir, who's a research and medical advisor at SOBI, and they were presented a trial that they are starting to recruit now for MASS. And some of you may have experienced this. If you have and you would like to enter anything in the chat, have you ever experienced it? If you know not, what do you wish you knew more about? You know, it might just say, well, gosh, I'd love to be a little bit more educated, like what to look for, things of that nature. If you've had it, what would you like others to be educated about? So those are things to think about. And again, we can package these questions together and follow up after the fact. But those type of answers and information will help us as an organization help you and help others. Because when we hear from you, and we hear from the patient voice, then that's how we can develop the materials that you need. So let's listen to Jeanette. I did snip this one down quite a bit because it's pretty scientific. And then I'm going to jump in and do a little bit of explanation for you. So let me go to, let's see, it's 2649. So let me go to 2649. I'm going to turn my video off.
And good morning, everyone. So today I'm presenting on behalf of a big SOBI team. I think a lot of them are already here, and I'm speaking not about still, I'm speaking about a complication in still, which is a macrophage activation syndrome. But please, before entering my speech, I would like just to say that this slide deck is for educational purpose, and the program about MASS, which is sponsored by SOBI, it's not a promotional program. So what is MASS? As we said, MASS, it stands for macrophage activation syndrome. It is a disease that it is linked to overactivation of the immune system, and it is usually observed in the context of an underlying disease. So we always have an underlying disease, and in our case, it is a rheumatological disease. And this rheumatological disease could be, of course, still disease in priority, but it can also be lupus or Kawasaki or any other rheumatological disease. So what we should keep in mind that MASS is a rare disease. It's a disease that it's observed in adults, it's observed in pediatrics patients, but it is a rare disease. So for example, we observe it in around 10% of pediatric patients who present the pediatric form of the disease, SGIA, and in around 15% of the adult patients who present the cell disease. So it's rare, but also what we should keep in mind, it is a life-threatening disease. And this is really very important. It is a life-threatening disease, and it is a disease with a very big, significant burden on the patient, but also on the caregiver, on the family, on everyone. So, and you'll understand later on why I am saying this. So how MASS is to present? Clinically, we have 3 different patterns. You can see on the right part of the slide deck, the 3 different presentation of MASS. First of all, we have the classic MASS, which is a most frequent presentation. What does that mean? This means the patient, he has an underlying disease, well diagnosed, well known, well confirmed, and then later on he will present MASS as a complication of this underlying disease. This is the first form. The second form, which is observed in approximately 25%, MASS is observed at the time of the diagnosis. So the patient, when he will go to the doctor, to the clinic, he will go with a MASS symptomatology. And because MASS is always triggered by something, then the doctor will have to look about this trigger, and then he will diagnose the cell disease at a later time point. And then we have this persisting relapsing MASS. This is a form of MASS that Rashmi spoke about in her speech, and it is very rare, and it is a MASS that continues appearing and appearing and appearing in a patient life who has the underlying disease well diagnosed and confirmed. So when mass it occurs, we know that it will attack a lot of our organ. It can attack the lung, it can attack the liver, it can attack the neurological system. So clinically, usually it is very difficult to diagnose mass, and it can be easily confused with underlying disease. However, there are still some typical symptoms that you should be aware about that can help you to make a kind of differentiation. First of all, for example, the fever. The fever that you observe in mass, it's not really the fever that you observe in the underlying still disease, because in mass the fever is very high. It's a persistent fever. It's a non-remitting fever. In mass, we have rash, and the rash is usually different from what we observe in the underlying disease because it's related to the low platelet and to the resulting bleeding. So it's the patient will present, for example, with some recordal bleeding, with some skin bleeding, with some very easy bruising, and of course, depending on what organ will be impacted, and the patient will present the symptomatologies that can correspond. And what I want you really to keep in mind is that when mass is here, mass is a quickly deteriorating disease. It means within hours or even within a day, the patient or the outcome of the patient can be really very severe. And I hate to say it, but mass can take a very fatal course very quickly and very rapidly. So it is very essential, and it is very important that when we think about mass, that we call our doctor and work on a diagnosis immediately with him, and that we start a treatment. This is an emergency. We need to start that treatment very, very quickly.
Okay, I'm going to put that one back, start my video back up. I'm back. Excuse me. So that gave a little, I hope that gave you a little bit more information about mass and sort of what to look for. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, actually, let me put that screen back up here. I won't play it, but something that I thought personally, as knowing about stills. Now, just as for those who aren't familiar, I live with AR arthritis diseases myself. It is not stills, but I definitely have become very intimate with understanding the disease. And one of the things that I felt was worthy of pointing out here is that the fevers are different. So I would, if I'm thinking of an education for people who need to be on the lookout, or for doctors, or for emergency rooms, I think that knowing that, oh wait, my fever's different this time. And now I know that there's a percentage that experience mass with onset of stills, whether that's juvenile or adult. And I think especially if you're already living with it, that would be a really big indicator. Like, my fevers seem different. And so I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was an opportunity to kind of zero in on maybe some education. So if you had any opinions on that, would love to hear that as well. So let me go back over here. And again, if you're comfortable and want to add anything in the chat, feel free. Otherwise, we will make sure that we send you the list of these questions, because your voice matters. We only know what to provide education if you let us know, or what works or what hasn't worked. And you saw that I just sort of came to a conclusion, possibly, of the differentiation of the fevers could be a good point, but we need to hear from you. It's very important for that. So, all right, let's move to the next here. So she went in and talked a lot about what they're doing. So Sobi recognized that obviously mass is a huge problem, and because it's so serious, they really wanted to address, well, how can we stop it from happening? How can we prevent it from getting, getting so bad so quick? And you may have heard the term cytokine storm. It became fairly popularized I know in the stills community, you may have heard of it before COVID, but the rest of the world sort of got introduced to it in COVID. So, because when the severe cases, that was what was happening to a lot of people. And so it's sort of become more on the forefront. And as she said, they're not sure exactly what always triggers it, but I took out the video part, and of course you can go back again and listen to the whole thing. But it was very scientific, very technical. And what I wanted you to look at was the IFN little Y that they have there, and that is the inflammatory marker. That's the thing that's being controlled here. So we talked about IL-18 before. So just think about this as another mechanism of stopping something in its tracks. So if you sort of look at the graph here, their theory is, can we block the activity of this IFNY, and will it help to not move over? So will it, if they stop it, if they're able to control that, then maybe in theory, will that next phase be prevented? And so that's what they are working to study. And this is the name of their treatment. And they do have a disclaimer at the top. It is not approved treatment right now for MASH, but they do have this drug. And they know that if hypothetically, it could stop MASH, as we just said. So they want to see, because wouldn't that be an amazing feat if it did help with the progression. So she talked about an early study. So in the beginning, if you were on, we talked about different phases of clinical trials. And I mentioned that in the very beginning, there's only a handful, and it's even more difficult when it's a rare disease like stills, because it's harder to recruit, there's less people. But it's still equally as important. So there's this early results. They had 9 patients, and they had very positive. But again, you cannot really make a conclusion that is scientifically considered this will, like, credible. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Scientifically credible if it's only 9 people. Because again, think back to where you're talking with people you know in different support groups or online communities. You can have 9 people and they all have completely different responses. So 9 is great that they had positive in those 9, but okay, what if 9 more people came in and didn't have the same? So they need to recruit for a bigger trial. So that's where they are right now in that.